was a great first panel, and thank everybody for being here today. I'm Butler Burdine. I have the honor of being Oxford American's guy on the ground here in New Orleans, and I want to tell you about something really exciting. If you are already a subscriber to Oxford American, and maybe if you're not, you're very aware that the Oxford American does a Southern annual music issue every year. And this year, the December issue, the 14th Southern annual music issue, will be dedicated solely to the music of Louisiana. So, very exciting. It took them 13 years to get it right so they could, get to Louisiana. And we've actually talked about maybe doing volumes of issues to cover all the music, but we have to stick to just one 80-page editorial piece that is being guest edited by Alex Rawls, who was on our last panel, so that's exciting too. It'll come with a 24-track CD, The Music of Louisiana, and so a little added bonus. If you got a copy of the magazine, and there's still plenty of copies out there, inside is a subscription card and a holiday gift subscription card. So if you would like to subscribe to get the issue or give the issue to someone as a gift, you still have time to do that. The music issue is being sponsored by the Louisiana Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism. And in addition to that, the Lieutenant Governor has designated the year of 2013 to be the year of music in Louisiana. So the December issue will kick off what we're calling the Louisiana Soundtrack Experience. And for the entire 2013, we'll tour the state, 5 cities, Shreveport, Natchitoches, Faraday, Lafayette, and then wrap everything up here in New Orleans in November. And it'll be a half-day experience, more panel discussions. We'll be previewing the Harry Connick Jr. LPB TV project, if you've heard about that. And then there'll be, of course, a salute to Louisiana food, and then a concert. And the concert is going to focus on not only legends and the heritage music of Louisiana, but on up-and-coming new artists and new musicians that the state's producing. So I think it's going to be very exciting. Be watching oxfordamerican.org for more information. Fill out your cards. If you want to leave them with us today, we'll collect those, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And for those of you who are joining us, thanks for coming. And for those of you who are following along online and providing blowback on Twitter, thanks for watching and commenting. I'm told there are a couple of different hashtags in play. One of the suggestions was to settle on one, maybe OA panel, since Symposium uses up so many characters. So that's just a suggestion. This panel will really just kind of pick up where we left off, and just want to introduce our panelists. Carl Redman is the executive editor of The Advocate in Baton Rouge, and he has been in newspaper journalism for many years. Spent 17 years in the Capitol News Bureau before becoming managing editor, and he has been executive editor since 2007. Justin Shiels is a self-proclaimed New Orleanian and founder of the digital magazine and lifestyle blog InvadeNOLA.com. Steve Beatty is the managing editor of The Lens, a nonprofit online newsroom focusing on New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. He worked as an editor for the Times-Picayune for 15 years and also was an editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and an investigative reporter for the Pelican Institute. And Campbell Robertson is a Southern correspondent for the New York Times. He has been a foreign correspondent in Iraq and covered the theater business in New York. He was born and raised in Alabama. So, Carl, let's begin with you. Your newspaper has begun publishing a New Orleans edition. So you're expanding into the void left by the Times-Picayune. Could you tell us a little bit about how you see that expansion and whether or not are you going to become the national paper of record? I mean, the state paper of record.
We sort of already are. Can you hear me? We sort of already are the state paper of record, or at least that's kind of the way we view ourselves. We're the hometown paper of state government. Traditionally, the governors don't like us very much because we usually take them to task. We're fighting with the general administration right now over some things. We're coming to New Orleans not to replace the Times-Picayune, and I'm trying to make sure that everybody understands that we can't be the Times-Picayune. When they started their layoffs and they announced that they were going to 3 days a week, I understand they had 174 people in their newsroom. We're going to be down here with 8. We can't compete with what was 174 people. And I will tell you, with 8, the margins are very thin. We're owned by a family. We're not owned by a big corporation. And the family is, while they are very dedicated to good journalism and to the idea that the First Amendment does owe something back to the people that we serve, they can't do this at a loss. So we are starting small, but we're very encouraged. We've started taking subscriptions mid last week. They were so overwhelming they crashed our phone system. We have hired out, contracted out the circulation and subscription service now. There's 30 lines going in, and they're still crashing the lines. As the other panel was going on, somebody asked about how many subscriptions we had, so I emailed the circulation director. As of last night at close of business, we had 4,600 home subscribers. We estimate clearly by the end of the day we'll have over 5,000. 5,000 was kind of our magic number to at least have a break even on our initial foray into the market. We're projecting probably by the end of next week or the following week to be in the 10,000 range for home delivery. If we get some single copy sales on that, we could be 15,000, and 15,000 would be a nice number. I think I can get a couple more reporters with 15,000 circulation. But our objective in New Orleans is to give our readers kind of the high points of what's going on in their community. We can't dig down as deep or as wide as the Times-Picayune did. And I think that some people are going to be very frustrated with that, and we just ask you to bear with us. We are not intending to be the hometown newspaper for New Orleans and give you the kind of in-depth investigative stuff that the Picayune did. Hopefully we'll grow to that point where we will be able to do some of that. But initially, we're going to be covering the major stories of the day. And I think if you give us 30 days, you're going to like what you see. We've got coverage from the other side of Lafayette all the way to the Mississippi line. And now we'll be basically everything south of I-10 to the Gulf. We will have some sort of staffing on. And we think that gives a unique perspective to the state and to the South Louisiana region. It's more than just New Orleans that you'll read about. You'll read about Baton Rouge, and you'll read about Faraday, and you'll read about Shreveport and Lafayette. And it'll give you a good perspective on where the whole state sits. And that's kind of our model, and that's where we're going with it.
Well, I'm hoping we can talk a bit about business models and the different business models that we can expect to see going forward in the news business. Steve, you're approaching this from a nonprofit model. So can you talk a little bit about the difference in your view between?
Sure. It's our stated purpose not to make money on purpose, unlike most of unlike a lot of the other newspapers on the scene today. We belong to an organization called the Investigative News Network. There are 60 nonprofits across the country that all trying to figure this out. The executive director of the organization is fond of saying nonprofit isn't a business model, it's simply a tax status. We still have to come up with ways to bring our money in. and that means we're trying to emulate some of the leaders in our field that put on major events or that draw sponsorships for different events and might put on high school trainings and raise money that way. We're exploring a lot of different ways to bring money in. Right now, we were primarily financed by national foundations. Obviously, we're grateful for them. We'd be equally grateful for any donations from anyone in this room who would be inclined to help us out. Still, no one has figured out how to make nonprofit journalism to be sustainable. The Texas Tribune is moderately close. They expect to be in the black this year. They started off, though, with a tremendous $5 million help from an angel investor, so that helps get a good running start to things. The Lens did not start off with that. But we hope to swipe a few ideas from the Texas Tribune and everyone in this nonprofit world. I think that's one thing that sets us apart. We're all willing to help each other very much and explain, we tried this idea, it didn't work. There's a lot more collaboration and a lot, we're not trying to sell we're not trying to sell eyeballs to our advertisers. We're just trying to put the news out there, and we hope the people that consume the news and appreciate the kind of thing that we do will help support it and keep it going.
Well, advertising is one of the most vexing elements in the traditional news model. And I guess, Justin, you have when we spoke earlier this week, you had some interesting ideas about advertising and the precarious nature of that. Could you address that?
Yes. I think one of the scariest things that's happening with traditional news models is that for so long they have been ad-based ideas. So we get 50,000 people to read our paper, we can sell an ad for a certain price. That can be a little difficult, I think, because now we have all these competing media sources that are also looking for advertising revenue in different ways. So, for example, we've all heard of things like Groupon or Living Social. We have Facebook that's trying to steal advertising dollars. We have Twitter who's stealing advertising dollars. We have Google Ads. So all of these online places that specifically are made take these advertising opportunities from local papers and local news sources. I think where we are now is that everyone is trying to find a sustainable model that maybe doesn't rely so much on the advertising specifically. I would have to say, unfortunately, we as a collective media source have taught people that they don't need to pay for news. They don't need to pay for information. And that is probably the biggest problem with the internet today. People have learned that if I can't get it from you for free, then I can get it from someone else for free. So now I think maybe we need to figure out how we can pull back and teach people to pay again, or we have to explore completely different revenue models that maybe are completely separate from advertising.
Campbell?
I think that's interesting too. To read Campbell's stuff in the New York Times, they'll let you see a few for free, and then you got to start paying for it. But how many people know a way around that? Right? You go to Facebook or paste some links in, and you don't have to pay for it. So I think your model might be one of the more successful ones, but still, we're trying to find a way around it.
And Campbell, could you talk about your experience from the New York Times, which is obviously the most ambitious online publishing enterprise out there, and has really been pushing the envelope in terms of presentation and strategy?
It was my understanding there'd be no math. So,
no math. We don't want math.
No, I mean, I think journalistically, we tend to overcomplicate these problems. Economically is the big problem. We talk about the discussion about sort of new media and social media versus old, more traditional forms of journalism. I mean, it's like they're not just you have to do two flavors, one or the other, like Clint Eastwood or Justin Bieber. It's like there's different platforms work better for different kinds of journalism, and there's some purely graphic journalism that is as good as explanatory reporting as John McPhee. And then there's some video journalism that could sort of replicate what Harrison Salisbury was doing in Appalachia, you know. And then there's some great storytelling. And so they're all just tools. And so journalistically, you want to be able to use all the tools from Twitter to traditional storytelling to graphics to video. And that's not that complicated, just what platform fits the story. The complicated thing is, it's easy for me to say, but that requires a lot of people and a lot of money. And if you want to have it all under one roof, which is the old model, which is you have all it under one roof, either the Times-Picayune or just the city's newspaper, figuring out how to pay for that with dwindling ad revenues. I mean, the Times paywall has more than 500,000 subscribers, which is great, but it didn't used to be, the model did not used to be subscriber-based, it was advertising-based, and the advertising revenues are still a major problem.
Well, and if I could add on it, even with the paywalls, if you look at the percentage of gross revenue that you get from paywalls, New York Times has been one of the most successful, but I think it's only a few percentage points of gross revenue right now
Sure.
that they're getting from subscriptions. LSU had an economist, I think his name was Robert Picard, who was an expert on media finances a couple of years ago, and he came out and met with our editors, and one of the things he told us was, at the time, this is '09, there was one newspaper in the country whose web revenue was adequate to cover its traditional news expenses. And everybody said, what is it? Well, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. No, it was the LA Times. And the only reason that they could do it was because they were reaching out for like 1 million eyeballs in an area that had 20 million people in it. So they didn't have to have much penetration.
Right.
So I think you've hit, the whole thing is money. I mean, how are you going to pay for the good journalism? You know, that's kind of at the heart of all of this.
I mean, when, you know, the Iraq Bureau is a very expensive, very, very expensive operation.
Yeah,
And like-
and we've seen newspapers pull back from their overseas operations quite a bit over the last decade, and part of it is money, because they are very expensive.
Well, it's interesting, when the Daily Picayune was founded in 1837 by George Kendall and I can't remember his partner, they immediately began foreign coverage. They began covering the Republic of Texas. Kendall himself was imprisoned by the Mexican government, marched 2,000 miles. He was along with the Santa Fe expedition. He covered the Mexican War, and this became a big. It's interesting how the scale and how the economies of news production have changed so radically. And can we brainstorm a little bit about how newspapers might continue to, how newspapers that are based in local areas are having such a hard time not only covering foreign news, but their own localities. What is it that's driving that margin? Why is the margin getting so thin?
Eyeballs, subscribers. In 2006, the Monroe News Star World had 53 people in its newsroom. Last time I talked to my friend Kathy Spurlock up there, she had 22, I think, something like that. So they're less than half their size. It's a revenue thing, but I think part of it is that I think that the one size fits all, or everything under one roof, is kind of at the heart of this. What we're seeing is a splintering of the media. And there's going to be different roles for different places. We're going to have the nonprofits like Steve's outfit. We're going to have the for-profits like ours. The Picayune's got a business model, which I will tell you, our money crunchers at our newspaper tell us they're going to make a fortune off of what they did, at least the first year. That this is a very good business model in terms of revenue. There's no reason it can't be good journalism as well. There's a lot of communities that don't have daily newspapers that have very vibrant journalism that covers their local politics and their local government and holds people accountable. But the smaller these operations get, the less resources they have to put into those in-depth pieces. we used to have a full-time investigative reporter. We don't have a full-time investigative reporter anymore. We parcel it out among the newsroom. It really is, it's a revenue issue. And if you look at the Pew Center, for one of the Pew Centers, there's so damn many of them, released a study yesterday about the news habits of Americans. And one of the things that they pointed to was this rise in social media. They said people are getting their news from social media. I kind of question whether they're really getting news from social media or whether social media is directing them to more traditional news outlets. But whatever the case, people's consumption is changing. And one of the things I'd like to talk about eventually is that consumption, because the Pews thing had a very scary thing in it. But at the end of the day, nobody works for free. And so the issue is, how do you generate revenue? And the paywall model is one, the grants and subscription model is another, ad revenue is another one out there. There's going to be a lot of niches for a lot of products.
You know, in talking about the financial models, you referred to your investigative reporter, or former investigative reporter. It's some of the most expensive reporting there is to do, because a reporter might spend 2 or 3 weeks looking into something only to determine that there isn't a story there. That kind of work is still important to be done, to chase rumors down and decide there's not a story to do, but that really doesn't make advertisers very happy. No one wants to put their ad on an empty page, where you've said this didn't work out. So that's one reason why a lot of newspapers are cutting back in investigative coverage or deeper analytical coverage, the same kind of thing that takes a lot of time. There's a piece that was published in the Columbia Journalism Review in 2010 called The Hamster Wheel by a guy named Dean Starkman. And he refers to, the internet allows us to publish all the time, anytime, but it doesn't mean we have to.
Yes.
We should take our time. I love it if a reporter of mine hangs up the phone and stares out the window for 15 minutes and gets to figure out what was just said to me, why, what's behind it, rather than, wow, I just got a great quote, I need to get this out immediately. The previous panel talked about that and how the churn happens as someone puts one quote on there before they fully understand the context of that quote. And I think being able to finance that kind of deeper understanding of a story is what guides civic decision-making and intelligent decision-making on the part of both our elected leaders and us, the people that help influence them.
I would want to add to that. I think you hit the nail on the head with the idea of niche audiences. I think newspapers are trying to be everything for everyone, and we're living in an age where that's not feasible, that's not possible, and people have very specific things that they are interested in. So for me personally, when I go to NOLA.com and I see a movie review of a national movie, it's like, well, I can get this national movie review from a number of sources, a number of national outlets. So it's like, actually, for me, it would be more valuable if their focus was much more honed in on things that were very specific to the local, the state of the local situation. I sit at this table at a very, very different perspective from the people next to me, in that our content creation on invadenola.com is very focused on the people, the places, and the projects that are happening in New Orleans. And I don't at all think of myself as a journalist in the traditional sense. I'm a blogger. I do a digital magazine as well. But I think what I do with Invade NOLA helps news organizations, because what we're doing is we're talking about things that are not the hard-hitting investigative journalism. We're not talking about who has a pothole on their street or who was murdered on their street. And I think that's where the news should focus. That's what's important, I think, in these local communities everywhere.
Well, I want to stand up for people who refer to themselves as bloggers and say that the work that's being done in the blogging community is just as important in some cases as what we're doing out here. There's folks out there, Slabbed, American Zombie, and others that have taken a significant amount of time to look into something, and that traditional mainstream media either ignores or picks up on in ways that don't always credit them. And in the same way that the term blog tends to be used dismissively for anyone. One of the municipal court judges at a public hearing last year, when asked about something that appeared in the Lens, said, "I don't read that blog." It's just kind of a way to be dismissive. Campbell's blog over at the New York Times is pretty sharp, so. I'll give that.
Little Midtown block.
Well, how do you manage the time pressures of being a blogger and still trying to develop longer form stories? And I think this is something that comes up a lot in discussions, and it goes back to the hamster wheel. How do you get yourself off that, or keep yourself out of that hamster wheel?
I can speak to that directly. We set the rules. When you do a publication, you decide when you want to publish and what you want to publish in a lot of ways. So just because I get news at 10 a.m., you literally just said that. Just because I get news at 10 a.m. doesn't mean I have to post it by 10:15 a.m. I can decide to hold on to that information and publish it at a regular pace. So our strategy specifically is we're doing 2 to 5 posts a day, and we stagger them by hour. So in that regard, I do have a quick churn that I have to do, but it's regulated in a way that for us is more manageable.
I think that's one of the problems with the internet, is that there is a rush in many places to get things out, and there is this churn. And because of the constant churn, that's one of the things that does prevent reporters from doing a lot of the in-depth. They've got to keep updating all day long. But one of the things we do see is errors of fact from very reputable news sources. I think CNN, I think, initially reported the Supreme Court ruling in the Obamacare case wrong. And you know,
but they were first.
Yeah, but who's better than CNN? I mean, so that is a problem. You know, we've become so saturated with this information that keeps coming at us, and that's one of the things that, as a newspaper, that in least in terms of my newspaper, one of the things we're trying to build into our long-term model, because understand me, while we're coming to New Orleans and trying to put hard copy newspapers, traditional legacy newspapers in people's hands, we recognize the digital, and we've got a robust digital presence, and we're continuing to push push our digital presence. But part and parcel of that is this idea of who's first and how much are you going to get out there, and it really does. If you don't slow down, you can really run into problems. And so one of the things we're going to try to do is transfer our credibility as a newspaper to our website going forward, so that maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years out, that credibility will attach. I think that's one of the things with the New York Times that makes them so attractive all over the place, is they have this huge credibility.
Well, and I think it's important to point out that, I mean, CNN got it wrong on the TV. You know, it's the internet. Again, these are all just tools, and you can do it well or not do it well. It doesn't matter if it's in paper, internet, TV. And fundamentally, regardless of the tool, it's just how you use it. Now, the reason the Times, I mean, obviously publishing things too quickly can be problematic. The Times and our former...
If you remember, that was at the Chicago Tribune, Dewey wins.
Do it I don't know who you're talking about. But yeah, well, no, Judith Miller, that was in a black and white newspaper, and it was wrong, So it's how you do it. I mean, one reason, and this comes back to an economic question, though, because one reason I feel more comfortable when I do have to do updates on breaking stories is there's often a rewrite person at the national desk. There's an editor who'll take a look at it. And that's people, and you have to pay their salaries. And, when you're sending stuff straight to the web from a reporter, I wouldn't trust myself with that. I want somebody to look at my stuff before it hits the web. So, again, there's smart ways to do it and not smart ways, but smart ways also just tend to be more expensive.
And I think that's an important factor with some of the changes coming at NOLA.com. From what I understand from my colleagues there, there's going to be some direct publishing to the web from the reporters. It's a little bit of ready, fire, aim, with somebody coming behind them to go through and proofread. And one of my concerns that may be addressed at NOLA.com is a corrections policy. If you come to my site at the Lens, NOLA.org, you'll find occasional stories where we've gotten something wrong, and we make sure we leave it up there, and we strike through and underline and put a note in on why we changed it. Yeah, what's one of the most interesting things in a newspaper, right? The corrections column. You want to see what, we got 30,000 words right yesterday. Here are the 10 that didn't quite cut it. But as they discussed at the previous panel, these stories that just churn, where they go in and correct things and the changes get put down the memory hole, it just doesn't make sense. If somebody writes that there were 5,000 people at the Oxford American Symposium, and you send this to somebody and say, can you believe how wrong they got this? And by the time they call it up, it's been changed to 500. And you're thinking, well, my friend, I'm going to send him some reading glasses. But there's got to be some level of accountability for when you send something out and get it wrong and that you own your mistakes. That's how we build our credibility, by admitting that we've made a mistake, and all the words that you don't see corrected are probably right.
I mean, and I do think that credibility, you talked about at the last panel, which is if you don't have a big dog in town, there's that sort of Walter Cronkite, eminence in town, where it's not, Jason's blog and other places, you can do great investigative hits that will shake everything up from anywhere. But in terms of that daily free-floating paranoia that public officials should have, that it isn't that they're going to get exposed with a bag of money, just that how did I look in the city council yesterday? Did I say stuff stupid? Do I know what I'm talking about? What's the source that instills that fantastic paranoia? That's what the big dog in town uses. And it may not be the toughest outlet, and it may not always have the best investigative scoops, but it's the one that constantly keeps public officials on edge. And that's from 175 years of credibility. That's where you get that.
Can we talk about the challenge that is presented by aggregators and how newspapers and other producers of original content can cope with things like Google News and Huffington Post and to some extent the Daily Beast, where people are exploiting your work and then getting the page views?
I hate aggregators. We've fought quite a few of them in Baton Rouge on the political scene, and we've got one that's, if he does it again, we're taking him to court. We've put our demand letters and that on him, and it is a very difficult thing, and there are some legal cases pending. I think the Times has one up in, I don't know if it's in New York or one of the contiguous states, where they're going after one of the aggregators for violating their copyright. And it is a difficult situation because, as everybody keeps mentioning, what we do costs a lot of money, and the more you do of it and the deeper you do it, the more expensive it gets. We have, one of the things that we pride ourselves on is our sports coverage, and somebody earlier kind of downplayed the Drew Brees thing, but it attracts a lot of eyeballs. But our LSU sports shooters, our LSU photographers do LSU football like nobody else, and it's not uncommon for us to find somebody who has stolen some of our work and put it up for commercial use or just as illustrations on a news story, and then we have to take the time to go and call, track them down, and on the internet it's getting harder and harder to track down who it is, and then sometimes you have to get the lawyers involved. It's a mess, but it's just a little bit more high tech. I think Campbell keeps talking about, these are different tools, but it's no different than in 25 years ago, if somebody picked up one of our stories and published it in another magazine, that happened all the time. So it's just a little bit faster now and easier for people to do.
I love aggregators. My goal, as I said, as a nonprofit newsroom, is to get our stories in front of as many people as possible, as long as they give us credit. We had problems with one outfit that automatically picked things up from our RSS feed, that placed it on their site that didn't include a byline, and we went through some small changes to make that appear. And I realize that most people who read sites don't always read bylines to figure out where they came from, and I may be helping out another site by providing that information. But one of the ways in which the lens tracks its effectiveness at what we do is not necessarily in how many people come to our site, but what stories we write that someone seizes on and speaks to, and if we identify a problem, has it been addressed or has it at least come up into civic conversation? So to that end, if you've got a website and you want to take my copy, please do. Happy to have it out there. We're essentially Creative Commons in that way. Just give us some credit, take our stories, and give us some love.
We're gonna take some of his stories, Bob.
Yeah.
At this point, if people who have questions would begin, if you haven't written them down already, do so please and pass them down to the end of the aisle. I hope we'll have a little bit more time for questions in this session. So,
at the last panel, what I thought was interesting when we were talking about archives and how the newspaper is the shared community consciousness. I know that everything that's written in the Times-Picayune gets archived in LexisNexis and Newsbank and other things. I don't know, and it would be worth understanding, where the things that are printed just online will get that same kind of archiving. Will there be a collective record? I hate to raise a question I can't answer. Maybe Carl, I don't know if you all have.
I can tell you what we do is we archive the final versions of all the stories that run in the newspaper. Those tend to be the final versions that run online. We do not archive the periodic updates throughout the course of the day, at least we don't now. We have a mechanism to go back and retrieve those if we want them. But one of the limitations on some of those, at least for us, is that retrieval only lasts as long as the contract with the person who's providing that service. And if the contract goes away, usually your database goes away because it's just horribly expensive to transfer that over. So some of that archiving is lost.
But do you have pieces that appear only online and not in print, and what happens to those?
If it's a final version, it goes into our archive. If it say it's a news bulletin about a tank truck full of butane tips over on I-10 and clogs up the interstate, first report on that goes online. We report it throughout the day. Most of that first report and most of the updates are not going to go into our archive. If we had a child missing and we wrote a quick story about it and then they found the child and we wrote that, and so we never did put anything in the paper because it didn't really rise to being a news story anymore, the final version online would probably hit our archives.
I actually have one burning question for you guys. I grew up watching TV all the time. I'm sure there are plenty of people in the audience that also did, and I understand that we have all been mourning the loss of the Times-Picayune being daily, but one thing we do have that is consistently daily, numerous times a day, is the local news. And I've always wondered, it seems to not have the same level of respectedness, I guess, or people value the printed word and so much, and I think that's wonderful. But when you think about reaching the widest number of people in the easiest way without any paper waste, like TV is actually the easiest way to do that. Probably more people have access to a television than they do the internet as well. So I've always wondered why we don't have WDSU on panels like this, because or whatever local news source, because they're doing something similar and reaching mass audiences as well. And I think there's a lot of overlap in what they do and what you guys do.
Yeah, we're partnered with and housed in WVUE television, and it's been interesting after 15 years, 20 years in newspaper newsrooms to be inside a television newsroom. I greatly value the work that they do, and having their websites get up to speed more quickly. I think you're going to find, as the Times-Picayune gave up its monopoly on printed copy 4 days a week, and people have to go online, as I think Alex said at the last panel, people are going to discover going online there's a lot more places to go for news. TV is going to be one of those. But as far as bridging the digital divide, in which a very small percentage of people in town have broadband internet access, well, probably a little more than half. You know, the radio as well. We have a budding partnership with WWNO, the NPR station. I would say people have radios and televisions just as easily. Being able to provide that information on demand, I think, is what's key, because, you know, that's why I love my Netflix, right? Yes. Or my DVR, because I don't have time to watch the 6 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock. But I think you're right, being able to see those pieces and to see those traditional media learn to use social media in such a way that they can get their word out to them. So when someone says, I saw my news on Facebook, all they did was see a referral to the television story that they can watch on demand.
Steve moderated a panel at Loyola a month or so ago, and one of the things that one of the panelists said that really struck me was that despite what the Picayune is doing, New Orleanians are not entering a news desert. There are a lot of outlets for the news. And going back to something Campbell said earlier about that we are just using different tools. I started in the newspaper business in 1974. There were afternoon newspapers all over the place. There was, I think, 3 major networks in New Orleans. Baton Rouge, I think, had 2 channels or something like that. There's been a proliferation of electronic. There's just been constant change in the media. So what we're going through now is not, I mean, it seems like it's unique because we're in the middle of it, but this has been kind of an ongoing phenomenon. You know, we had the telegraph and that took us to the immediacy of war. We didn't have to wait weeks for reports. And Vietnam, I remember Vietnam and the TVs bringing us to the battlefield in Vietnam. That was the first, basically live telecast from South Vietnam and North Vietnam. So things aren't changing, and the TVs are part of it. The TVs are more splintered now. I kind of wonder why they're not on more panels, but I don't do panels. I sit on them. I don't organize them.
Okay, well, I'll start hitting you guys with some questions from the audience. One, which is directed to the whole panel, is can a model such as Naomi Wolf's, where regular citizens receive journalistic training, work to supplement standard content? And I guess this also goes to, adds to and maybe that's a resounding no.
No, I sure hope so. You know, as I mentioned, there are some bloggers out there that are doing great work. The founder of The Lens started off, you know, in her bunny slippers in her kitchen looking into something that just didn't quite smell right, and it's resulted in 5 federal guilty pleas recently with the New Orleans Affordable Home Ownership Program. Yeah, it doesn't take a degree. Certainly, one of the best investigative reporters I worked with in Atlanta only had a high school degree and started as a copy boy. It just takes a degree of tenacity. So, you know, we're always on the lookout for any freelancers who want to work with us who have, you know, a tremendous background in journalism or not. But the one thing that is very hard to teach is a sense of curiosity or a sense of, you know, smelling something that's not quite right. And in a lot of cases, I think that's innate.
Well, this brings up the next question, which is, who is teaching the public to parse and consume all of this information? Are people just reading the things they like and with which they agree? Which this speaks to the fragmentation. But is there some sense in which, when we lose the common newspaper that everyone's reading, we're also losing that the sense that a newspaper teaches you how to read it if you read it, and when.
I think one of the things you're getting at is the curation of the news, and that is somebody sorting through this mass of information and kind of helping you navigate your way, what's important, what's not, giving you a little bit of analysis to kind of help you understand it. And that is something that is missing in many places, but if you look, there's plenty of it out there. I think what you lose is the serendipity of the newspaper, where you go through and you, oh, I didn't know that. Gee whiz, that's interesting. You weren't even looking for it. If you don't go looking for it on the web, a lot of times you're not going to find it. So that's one of the things that's missing. But one of the things that is heartening from my perspective for what we do is that some of the early research on how people use iPads and e-readers, e-tablets, indicates that they use them very much like newspapers. They get either a source, or they set up their own little source of news feeds. They read them at the same time. They sit down in the morning over coffee and they go up and down, and they read them at lunchtime. That's kind of good for us, because if we can translate what we do to those vehicles, then we get to do what we've always done with a brand new tool that's more ubiquitous and easier than a hard copy of newspaper. It doesn't kill as many trees.
So I actually hate this idea when we say that everybody read the newspaper regularly. Just because we had a daily newspaper, everyone had access to the news, but not everyone read the newspaper every day, obviously. And I actually know plenty of people who have never subscribed to any news source, and who predominantly get their news from their Facebook feeds. So like, when I say they get their news from their Facebook feeds, like their friend posts a link on that was on NOLA.com or another news source, Gawker.com or whatever. And so I think actually when you look at the way that a Facebook news feed works, it's actually very similar to like reading the headlines of a newspaper, because you're seeing real-time life updates of the people you care about, one, but then two, the things that they care about as well.
Their cats.
Yes. But aside from their cats, you're also seeing their political stances and these graphics of what they think people should know about. So in that way, I do think actually Facebook and Twitter are doing something very similar to what the newspaper does. And you decide who you follow on Facebook and Twitter. So technically, you're kind of becoming your own content decider, I guess.
But I want to hear from people that I don't like and what they think about things.
Yeah.
And I think that's the serendipity that Carl talks about. You know, that's why I sometimes friend people that I wouldn't friend in real life. Just so I can get so if you look over my friend list and you see yourself there, let's talk first about which category you're in. But I'm interested in a variety of points of views, and not just, that's that scares me about people who get their news feed from self-selected feeds, unless they're consciously making an effort to get opposing viewpoints in there.
I think that's totally, like, I think it's one of the most interesting things to watch going forward. I mean, fundamentally, you pointed this out, you're kind of trading one curator for another. I mean, there is a problem with the model of the editor who decides this is important and this is not, this is all the news that's fit to print. I think somebody put it that way. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely some drawbacks to that model. But on the other hand, you're trading that curator out for yourself as curator, and if you have all these friends on one side of the political aisle or stuff, that's, and we have Fox and MSNBC, and you have these sort of separate cocoons that exist where people, I mean, the facts aren't even agreed upon. Yeah. And the serendipity element as well, you go to Amazon and everybody says, well, the wonderful thing is you can find any book you want, and they have algorithms that figure out what you like and all this stuff. But sometimes, the best thing about a family-owned bookstore or a private bookstore is you go in and you say, I think I know what I want, but I don't know if I know what I want. And there's the guy who's like, you think you want that, but you really want this, because I've read every book. And those used bookstore guys who really know? And you can't replace those guys by having a website that says, look, find anything you want. And I'm like, but sometimes I don't know what I want. And that's, we need good curators, and maybe they're not necessarily producers and editors, but somebody. And I don't know who's going to fill that role. That is a concern.
I want to bring up a question that hasn't really come up. But if you read the Charles Portis play that's excerpted in this issue of the magazine, there's a character who is a former newspaperman who, when asked what he did for a living, he said, I spread panic for a living. and he riffs on this for a long time about how he noticed that all the vegetation in his circulation area was slowly turning brown. That his words were actually killing the life of the community. And so the question is, to what extent are we journalists directly responsible for the decline of our business by spreading panic for a living, by going for the most brutal and sensational stories. I know for a while, when my children were young, I really just dreaded being in an airport because you couldn't get away from the blaring, horrible news about what was happening in Iraq, or the latest child violence story. So I just want to throw that out and see if anyone has any reflections about the. Maybe our big problem is that we, as an industry, spread too much panic.
No.
No.
No, the old TV saying, if it bleeds, it leads. People have a grim fascination with death and destruction and mayhem. People don't slow down along the side of the road to look at the pretty wildflowers that are growing. They just keep going, 90 to 70 miles an hour. Have a car crash, or even somebody just changing a tire, and everything slows down, and people want to see what's going on. That's human nature, and I suspect if you could get the numbers, that if you go to one of those websites that shows, dead bodies and car accidents, whatever it is, they probably get more hits than the kitten website. So I don't think that we've poisoned our well. But I will tell you that I personally am concerned about the curiosity, particularly of young people coming up. There's been a lot of studies over the last 6-7 years, and Pew's thing that they released yesterday points right back at it. And as young people are not reading, they're not as curious as their predecessors. They don't read with the analytical ability of of younger people from earlier generations.
Twitter is exploding right now.
And this is a major area of concern. In 2007, Shorenstein did a study. They said, where do people get their news? Because they said, we're all worried about where people are getting their news. So the Shorenstein Center at Harvard did a study, and you know what they found out? Everybody says, they found out they get it from the internet. No, they found out they don't get any news. Young people weren't going to get any news anyplace. They got it by accident. Then there was a study on what do people read. They do it about every 10 years, and they're finding out that young people read less, and they read less involved material. It tends to be easier and at a more elementary level than their generations earlier. Pew yesterday released their study. What does it show? 18 to 24-year-olds are reading news, getting news at a much lower level than people who are older than them. That's something that as a society we ought to be concerned about, regardless of the venue that people get their news.
Well, I'm going to push back a little bit on that. Speaking for myself, even as a journalism student, my least amount of engagement with the news was probably in my college years, or in my 22 to 27 years old. You're busy trying to get your first job in journalism. But there's a certain level of engagement that comes with, maybe you hit 30, it's the adult thing to do, to get a subscription to, whether it's online to the New York Times or to the dead tree version that falls on your front porch. But, I certainly don't despair for the young people too much. I'm not sure that there's been that much of a gap. I'd like to see Pew compare their 20 to 30-year-old now compared with maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and see if there's that much of a jump. Maybe they've done that.
National Endowment for the Arts did that, and they did find a gap. And I think there may be something to what you say about as people get older, or they put down roots, they're more worried about what goes on around them. I think there is some of that, but all the studies that I've seen indicate that the generations coming behind us are not as engaged in the world around them. They're intensely engaged in their own lives, but in the communities in general, it seems to be. And I just throw that out. There hasn't been a lot of study on it. I'd like to see a lot more of it.
I would kind of say that there has been an exploitation of negativity on the news side sometimes, because like you can't open a newspaper, you can't watch the news without hearing about who died on what street, and it's like that's so important. But if that's all we're getting, then we get this very skewed picture of what our city is. Our city is not just people dying on the streets. It's like so many other different things happening, and it's like, so I'm actually going to use the TV news as an example. Like, you'll see robberies, crimes, and then you'll see a cute feel-good piece on kittens, but it's like not actually showing like positive things that are happening in the community. It's like that does sometimes, I think, get glossed over because, like you said, maybe some people enjoy negative things more. I would say, from my personal perspective, I actually have been responding a lot more to like positive news, and I think in founding Invanola, that was like one of my goals. It's like I want to shine a light on some of the great things that are coming out of this city. Some of these creative people that are doing cool things that are meaningful that would never ever make it on the news just because of the scope of their project or the size of their organization or the fact that it doesn't specifically affect like children, you know? So I don't know.
Now, I've talked to plenty of people who, get disgusted and picking up the Metro page and there's nothing but crime stories on there, and they're like, day after day, this is just a drag. I'm not sure I want to keep doing this. I was talking to a politician recently and introduced myself what I do, and he asked, well, do you guys write good news? And I said, no. Because that's clearly the question in his back pocket for most journalists. Like, are you just out to get us? Yes. But part of it is, I hope that what we write on the lens results in good things happening. I don't think it would be classified as good news in the traditional sense of a positive story or something that's uplifting. But it's intended to be, solution oriented or to identify a problem that people smarter than us can then go take care of. And in the end, we can say something positive came of it. But I don't think people come to us for the warm fuzzies. But people choose to come to us. And I think the fact that we do have a dedicated readership and people are starting to give us money show that people do want to see that bad side of things. I mean, we're not the site that runs the bodies or the salacious pictures, but we wouldn't be confused with good news.
Well, and I also think that's where the multipolar landscape can sort of self-select a little bit because, just straight news, we've talked about, and I think somebody in the last panel mentioned there needs to be a daily record, and there absolutely does, just of what happened every day. But what you really want to do as a journalist is do added value, and practically any story, no matter how minor, you can take it and back up and say, well, this is sort of not only the story in and of itself, but kind of what it says about this issue and what it says about how the city's dealing with it, and you can kind of add a little bit of analytical value. And I think if they're individual bloggers or if they're news organizations, the people who can do that intelligently, responsibly, aggressively will sort of rise, I think, over time. Who can take news stories and, give them some sort of intelligent context consistently.
And I think you hit the part of what we're supposed to do, and that's this idea of you find something that is a problem in the community and you shine the light on it and you try to raise public awareness. 2 years ago, every year at the end in January, we publish the pictures of everybody in Baton Rouge who's been murdered. Last year there was 80 some of them. 2 years ago it was 76, I think. And the day we published that was the day that Gabby Giffords got shot in Arizona. So we've got Gabby Giffords on the front page, and we've got this 2-page spread inside of 70-some people who were shot and killed in Baton Rouge. And we got letters to the editor from the gun nuts saying that, or the anti-gun people who saying that, if you take the guns away, Gabby's not going to get killed. And then the gun nuts who say, no, you'll take this gun from my cold dead hands. We didn't get a single letter about the 76 young, primarily black men who were killed in our community in 2009. So this year's the mayor's race. We spent once a month, at the end of the month, for 7 months, we focused on this community at risk, what was going on in Baton Rouge to young black males who were dying at an inordinate level. And we did it for one purpose, not to get the salacious and to get people worried. We did it to raise community awareness because this is a mayor's race year for us. And the number one issue now for the mayor's candidates is what are they going to do about crime in our community. That's what we're supposed to do. And you can call it negative all you want. That's the role of free press. Somebody said it's to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And that really is our role, and I think if we stop doing that, then we even do more for our own demise than if we aggressively pursue that philosophy.
You just illustrated the central difference between having an authoritative organ that feels it has an obligation to its community. You know, it's not just a question of, are we getting all these different perspectives of news from all these different places? That's not necessarily a bad thing. But the fundamental difference between the fragmented model and that model is you have an institution deeply invested in the city that is analyzing the problem and seeing what that community needs to know about. And that's an ideology and not just a question of form.
Yeah, but Steve does that here. And I think that can be a very vital role for web outlets if they are rooted in the community. We do it because we've got deep roots there and people know us, so we have a little bit more reach. But I think you're right. I think it is an important part of what is your community involvement and what is your obligation to the community you live in, not just you serve, you live in. In fact, I tell people all the time, our owners live in Baton Rouge. They have to go eat dinner and go grocery shopping, and people know who they are. And if we do something on the editorial side people don't like, they will buttonhole them and give them all kinds of stuff.
Well, maybe this is a good point to draw this to a close. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being on the panel. And I'd just like to thank our sponsors and the Historic New Orleans Collection for hosting this event. And I hope to see you, many of you, at lunch. And please support all these publications.